In the past few months, Aleera had been struggling more than ever. She had recently started crying out of nowhere, and last night she even had a panic attack. She was looking out of the window in her house in the countryside where she had gone to seek some calm. Her friends tried to take her out every other night, but when she was out with them, she had the feeling that they had suddenly become aggressive against one another. Everything was a good excuse to fight and yell. Aleera couldn't stand it. Every time she did her best to mix with wallpaper and not say a word. She was good at disappearing. You have to be when everybody else is more important and your opinion doesn't matter. Aleera had grown up in an average family. They weren't rich, but not even poor. Her parents and siblings were all important in some way. Her father was the responsible of the administrative department of a big company. Her mother was the daughter of the old mayor. Her sister was the most popular girl in school, and her brother was the wing in the town soccer team. She was nobody compared to them. She was only a little bookworm with a preference for fantasy and romance. Since she was a child, when the family met around the table, she didn't have a space in the conversation. She was always silenced because nobody cared about the lost adventure in her books. When some important topic came up, she was silenced because she didn't know. She had learned her place. Her country house was what the old lady in the hospice had left her. Aleera used to go to her to read her books while she was stuck in the hospice. They had met accidentally in the corridors one day when she went to her grandfather to bring him a copy of her mother's last book. Being a celebrity's daughter behind the scenes. The old lady had seen the book and assumed that she was a reader, so she had asked her to go to read her whatever it was she liked. Since that day, Aleera had gone every day. The old lady had been her safe harbor for years. Nobody knew she went to her, not even her best friend, Simon. Now the old lady had died, and she was surprised by finding out she was a rich lady and she had left her small country house as a gift to thank her for all the time she had spent reading for her. Aleera felt lonely. Her friends had forgotten to call her for the lost parties. It happened now and then. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't much of a company when she went anyway. The last time she had found herself caught up in a debate between two of her friends, Callista and Joseph. She could see the point of each of them were making, and she had tried to mediate to stop that stupid argument that was making her more and more anxious. The final result was that for no apparent reason, Aleera had ended up screaming like a banshee against most of her friends and having a nervous breakdown. Simon said it was nothing to worry about. He always did when he didn't want to waste time with some subject. She crawled in an armchair, close to the window, and started crying. She didn't even know why she was crying, but she felt so overwhelmed. She was sure she would end up dying alone in a cold hospital while everybody she knew had forgotten about her. She was sure her friends wouldn't call her ever again because she had exploded that way. Who wants the company of an insignificant someone that starts screaming out of nowhere, ruining the party for everybody? Simon had forcefully taken her out of the party, making it clear that she had ruined it for everybody. He had been sincere as always, and he had told her how disappointed he was in her and how humiliating it was to show up again knowing that everybody knew he was her friend. Simon was really a good friend. Aleera knew she was lucky to have him. He always listened to her when she was depressed, and when she was done, he passed to the next topic without a word. He often told her she needed someone that wouldn't mind her venting and ranting for hours, that would just do it like him, switching off his brain and letting her talk her nonsense out. Aleera was thankful that he let her vent and rant. She should probably call him. He sure could help her with this sudden crisis. The phone rang in that moment. She wiped her tears off and took her mobile from the little table in the middle of the living room. Unknown number. She cleared her voice and answered. "Hello." "Hello, Mrs. Simmons?" said a male voice on the other side. Aleera thought that with that melodious tone the guy could easily be a singer. Yes, sir. It's Aleera Simmons speaking. Hi, how can I help you? She answered with her usual kind tone. Hello, Mrs. Simmons. This is Armand Stewart talking, Stewart Insurance Ltd. Oh, hello, Mr. Stewart. She interrupted him. He was clearly someone important, and she didn't want to look impolite. Yeah, hello? We were already through that, said Armand, amused. I'm calling because Mrs. Beauvoir had the country house insured with us. She left enough money to cover for the insurance for the next 50 years. But we need you to sign the papers as her heir. We can't insure that person. Oh, okay, I understand. What do I have to do? Armand laughed. Well, it's quite obvious, Miss Simmons. You have to sign the papers, like I said. Aleera felt uncomfortable. Oh, I'm sorry. I understand that. I meant to ask if I should come to your office and when it would be a good time for you to meet me. Well, we normally receive clients at our office, but since Mrs. Beauvoir was such a good client, I normally went to her house when she needed to see me. I could reach you at the country house in the weekend. Aleera jumped. Oh, Mr. Stewart, that would be very kind of you, but I don't mean to bother you. I'm sure you're very busy and you have more important things to do. I'm not as important as Mrs. Beauvoir, and I don't want to pretend to be. If it doesn't bother you that I come to your office, I could be there whenever it's fine for you. There was a long silence. It doesn't bother me that anyone comes to my office, Mrs. Simmons. I'm afraid we're caught in an impasse, though. It's our company's policy to visit big clients at their homes for any important matter. I don't know who you are to everybody else, but to my company you are the most important client, and I would rather stick with the company's policy, Mrs. Simmons. Now she felt really uncomfortable. She didn't know that man, but she felt the urge to do something in return for that undeserved kindness. Well, I suppose you're coming from the town. I could prepare the guest room for you if you wish to stay overnight, so you won't have to book a hotel. Thank you, Mrs. Simmons. I will accept your offer. Mrs. Beauvoir used to reserve me the same kindness every time. I will be there Saturday at lunchtime. See you then, Mrs. Simmons. Goodbye, Mrs. Stewart, she said to nobody, since the phone had already been hung on the other side. Mr. Stewart had just invited himself for lunch. Aleera was a good cook, but she wasn't used to having guests. She thought to call Simon to tell him about the weird phone call with the insurance. What the hell are you talking about? I'm coming over. I'm not leaving you there with a random stranger for 2 days. He could well be a serial killer, and I don't even know where you are. Give me the address. I'll kick the bastard out at the moment he arrives. Aleera felt oddly angry at her friend's words. She was sure if Mrs. Beauvoir trusted the guy, she could trust him too. Oh, it's not necessary, Simon. I'm calling back and telling him I won't be here on the weekend. You really don't need to come over. Fine. That's better. I have a lot of things to do that can't be postponed. It would have caused me big issues to come there. Aleera sighed. She knew he was bluffing, just as she was when she said she would call Mr. Stewart to cancel. Simon was a busy man. He really had too much on his hands to leave everything for her the whole weekend. Yes? I'm talking to a client, babe, screamed Simon, talking to someone else. I'll have to go. Sarah's back. She's staying until Wednesday next week, so don't call me until Thursday. I don't want to have to explain to her who you are and why we're talking. And with those words he hung the phone. Sarah was his girlfriend. They had been dating for 1 year now, and Aleera knew Simon didn't want Sarah to know about her. Aleera was grateful that Simon wanted to protect their friendship. He had been clear that if Sarah had found out, he would have had to break their friendship. Sarah was more important. It made sense to Aleera. She was the girlfriend after all. The weekend arrived quickly. The past few days, Aleera had had little time to cry and have panic attacks. She had spent most of the time cleaning and dusting the house for the guests' arrival. She was going to cook pasta for lunch. The salad was already ready, and she had baked a cheesecake. She didn't know the guy's tastes. She hoped it would do. Aleera heard a car engine in the front yard. Mr. Stewart must have arrived. He was early. It was only 10 a.m. Aleera started panicking. She didn't expect him so early. She was a mess. Her long brown hair definitely needed a wash. She was going to take a shower in matters of minutes, but she didn't have the time now. She quickly grabbed a rubber band from her purse and tied her hair in a high ponytail. It wasn't great, but it looked decent. She quickly checked herself in the little mirror in the hall. Her green eyes looked at her from across the mirror. She was as pale as a dead woman. Her heart-shaped face was a little too rounded for her thin figure. Her cheeks were always red, as if she was in a constant state of embarrassment. Her lips turned red too when she was nervous, and so now they looked particularly red. She was wearing a little mascara as always. "This is as good as it's gonna get," she sighed. And then she ran to the door and almost opened with a big kitchen apron on. She was sure the man wouldn't have noticed anyway, but she decided to get rid of it before she opened the door. She was wearing a short sheath dress. She didn't feel very comfortable since it highlighted her two big breasts, her tiny waist, and her big booty. She looked like a hourglass, but she considered her body insignificant, just like the rest of her. Mr. Stewart stepped down from the black Wrangler Jeep. He opened the back seat without looking at her. He wasn't very tall, long blonde hair, lean but visibly muscular. She hadn't seen his face yet, but he moved boldly, and that detail made her blush. Mr. Stewart was a young man, the kind of man she usually felt attracted to, but that would never notice her. That kind of man looked for flashy women, and she was shy and insignificant. She sighed. At least she had a chance to get to know him. It was enough for her, more than she could ever ask for. She was happy she hadn't canceled. When he turned around, her jaw dropped, or better, it would have if she had been brave enough. What actually happened was that she controlled herself as usual. His face was angelic. His androgynous features created a nice contrast with his masculine attitude. He stopped for a moment, looking at her with a raised eyebrow. "Good morning, Mrs. Simmons. I'm a little bit early. I hope it won't be a problem." She bit her lip and tried to cover her body as she could. She felt so ugly compared to him. She felt sorry that he had to see so much of her body. She knew Simon would tell her she was a self-centered show-off and she should wear more suitable clothes. "It's okay, Mr. Stewart. I'm sorry I'm receiving you in this state. I hope you won't feel the urge to run away screaming. I assure it can be and will be more appropriate." Mr. Stewart opened his eyes wide. He smirked, and walking past her, he said, "Well, I hope you won't feel the need to be more appropriate for that matter. You can call me Armand. Left or right?" She jumped. "Left or right what?" she asked, not knowing what he was talking about. The room? The one on the left or the one on the right? "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Armand. It's the one on the right. I hope it's okay. It has the best view." He placed his briefcase on the floor and turned around to face her. "If I had wanted a hotel, I would have booked one. I'm your guest and I will do what I can to repay your hospitality. I'm coming to help you cook for lunch in 1 hour, and tonight I'll take you out for dinner if you have nothing against it, Aleera." He didn't wait for an answer and walked upstairs. Before it disappeared behind the corner, he added, "Oh, don't mind being appropriate. It's your house. Just be yourself." When she heard the door close behind him, Aleera shook herself from the state she had fallen into. She closed the door and ran upstairs to take a shower and wear something more appropriate. The lunch went fine. She was surprised that Armand was asking her so many personal questions. She wondered if it was normal for his job or if it was something he reserved to his important clients. An odd feeling raised within her through the meal. Although she knew it was only a facade that guy kept for a client, she felt oddly comfortable and appreciated. She felt heard for the first time in her life, as if her opinion mattered. "What do you do for a living, Aleera?" He asked the question she feared the most. She sighed and answered, knowing that this would end that happy state. "I don't have a job. I live with my parents. I write romance books, but I'm not being very lucky. Mom says it's because I'm a bad writer or I would have published something by now. She knows because she publishes a book every few months. Her most recent one is, I didn't ask you about your mother, sweetheart. Tell me something about your books. What are they about? Aleera blushed and bit her lip. Nobody had ever asked her that question. I'm sure it's not of your interest, she started, but he interrupted her kindly. Let me decide. She blushed. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it that way. I write love stories of that kind that doesn't happen in real life. A man meets a girl, they fall in love, and they live happily ever after. I like creating characters. It's like making friends that will never look down to me. He smiled. You must have really shitty friends if they look down to you. Oh no! She waved her hands in front of her face. They're all good people. It's only there isn't much to look up to when it comes to me. He smirked. I'm sure none of your friends is as sexy as you are. They're likely envious and they keep tearing you down so you won't outshine them. Aleera blushed. Well, I'm not sexy. My friends are. I'm sure you'd like them if you met them. Well, I'm sure you have plenty of friends and women in your life, but I could introduce them to you if you wanted to make new friends. He laughed. Thank you, but no thank you. I've had enough of haughty bitches that think they're the hottest chick on the planet. Well, Simon says I'm the haughty bitch that thinks she's the hottest chick on the planet. He says I should learn some humility. From what you say, you've had enough of people like me. Armand looked angry. Simon says, what is this? Are we playing the children game or something? Aleera looked at him confused. Simon is my best friend. Armand looked furious. Simon is your worst friend, and he's a prick if he says those things to you. Aleera was shocked. You don't know him? I'm sure if you... Armand interrupted her. I'm sure if I met him, I'd punch him senseless for how he treats you. I've heard enough. And now if you will excuse me, I have some work to do. I'll see you tonight at 7 p.m. Wear something elegant, and for fuck's sake, quit that appropriateness bullshit. Wear whatever makes you happy. Aleera was sure she must have done something to upset him. He didn't know her friends, and it was impossible for her that someone would take her defenses. It was nice, though, for once, to be taken into account. It was a pity it would be over in a day. She felt guilty towards her family and friends who had always been there for her, especially Simon, that was such a good friend. Hours later, Armand knocked on her door. She opened in a nightgown. She was still choosing what to wear. It was 6:30 p.m. Sorry to bother you, sweetheart. I was only thinking I've been a little hard on your friends earlier. You hold them dear, so maybe I should give them a chance. Maybe you could call this Simon and have him come over for lunch tomorrow? I will be glad to meet him before I go back to town. Aleera jumped. Oh, well, I'm sorry, but I don't have permission to call Simon until Thursday. Sarah is home and he doesn't want to have to explain to her about me. I'm sure you understand. Armand frowned. I'm sorry, I hadn't understood you and this Simon had something. He turned around to walk away. Aleera stopped him quickly. Oh no, there's nothing between Simon and me. We're just friends. Armand stopped and turned around with a raised brow. I thought you said this Sarah shouldn't know about you. Oh, that's only because he would have to explain why he hangs out with someone so insignificant and worthless. I'm sure you understand. You own an insurance. You sure won't want to be seen around with insignificant people. Armand walked up to her with a threatening expression on his face. I don't want to hear that kind of bullshit come out of your mouth ever again. Have I made myself clear? Now get ready, it's late. He turned his back and walked away. Aleera decided to wear something that Simon would consider inappropriate, just to make sure Armand won't think she was trying to be appropriate. She picked a long, tight suit with a deep rip at the front. The neckline showed a big portion of her big breasts. She picked the high-heeled shoes and tied her hair in a high ponytail. She wore a light makeup. Armand didn't comment her attire, but Aleera was sure that she had seen him smile. He took her to a very elegant restaurant in the countryside, full of people. She felt uncomfortable. She had never been in such a place. At the beginning of the dinner, Armand made her sign the papers. "Great! Now that we have business behind our backs, we can relax," he said, laying back on his chair. The evening went smooth. The food was tasty and Armand was kind and considerate as he had been during lunch. While going back, Aleera looked out of the window in silence. She was so happy she had had a chance to meet Armand and get to know him. Even if he thought her friends weren't right for her, she was sure he was right for her. But the day after, he was leaving and she wouldn't see him ever again. She sighed. The thought of Armand leaving her life for good hurt her deeply. "What's wrong, Aleera?" She shrugged. "Nothing. I'm really thankful for this evening, Armand. Everything was perfect. I'm sure your best clients are very happy with your attitude towards them." Armand laughed. "I don't take my clients out for dinner in places like this, Aleera, if that's what you think. But maybe I misunderstood your body language and I'm only business to you, am I?" Aleera jumped. Of course it was not business for her. She didn't even know what it meant to be business. "You're not business, Armand. I don't even know what that means, actually." "Would you date me if I asked you?" he asked abruptly. Aleera laughed lightly. "Well, in a parallel world in which you could ever notice me, I would be more than happy to date you." He stopped the car in front of the yard and leaned towards her with a crude smile on his face. "Well, welcome to the parallel world in which I sure as hell noticed you and I want to date you." Aleera blushed. "You're making fun of me." Armand moved his hand towards her face to touch her, but he stopped before touching her because he saw that she was shaking. He smiled. He had understood that the girl wasn't used to receiving attention, but he was more than determined to teach her what it means to be taken care of. "Nope, not one bit. I'm not making fun of you. I mean it, and if you will accept, I will prove it." Aleera nodded. She wasn't persuaded. Why in the world would someone like Armand Stewart want to date her? "I accept." Armand smiled brightly. "Great." He jumped down of the jeep swiftly and opened her door. While she was looking for the house keys in her purse, he said abruptly, "I would want to spend another couple of days here with you if you don't mind. I will pay for everything and don't worry, I won't touch you until you'll want it." Aleera wanted him to touch her right now, but she didn't say anything about that. "Sure, I'm happy to have you here. I only hope nights won't be a problem. I have nightmares sometimes. I'm sorry if I will wake you up. Maybe I should sleep on the couch so you won't hear me." She opened the door. "No, you won't. You'll sleep in a bed, and if you have nightmares and I wake up, I'll come to check on you." Aleera jumped. "Oh, you don't have to. I don't want to bother you in your sleep. I already feel guilty enough that I might wake you up." Armand blocked her against the wall, his face close to hers. Aleera really wished he would kiss her, but he did not. "I said I will come check on you. Unless you have something against having me in your room at night, that's what I'm going to do." Aleera swallowed and nodded thankfully. I would highly appreciate it. Nobody ever did anything like that for me." He smiled. "I will." This said, he walked upstairs without looking back. Aleera remained in the little hall for a few minutes, trying to recollect herself. She couldn't believe what had just happened. It must be a dream. During that night, she had a panic attack. She woke up screaming and felt like she was about to die. She was crying and sighing so hard that she could barely breathe. The door opened and Armand stormed in. He sat on the bed and took her in his arms. "Shh, it's okay. It's going to be okay, sweetheart. You're not alone. You have nothing to worry about." He helped her stand up and keeping her in his arms, he brought her downstairs. He let her sit on a chair and prepared a hot chocolate for her. The loneliness she felt when she had those panic attacks faded quickly. He took care of her until she fell back asleep in her room. The next 3 days, Aleera felt like she was living a fairy tale. Armand worked all day on his laptop and mobile phone, yelling at his co-workers and making agreements with clients. Aleera sat across the table with her laptop writing her book. She often stopped to look at Armand in awe. He was so perfect, and the thought of having him in her living room felt surreal. But he was there, bossing around half of the town from the countryside. At lunchtime and dinner, he would stop and cook for both. He didn't want her to do anything. He kept repeating he wanted her to know how it feels to be taken care of. After dinner, he wanted to hear her read her book from the beginning. He listened carefully and commented about the content and style. He also wanted her to tell him about her panic attacks. He wanted to know everything. He asked questions and showed he really cared to listen to her. All of a sudden, the idea of hearing from her friends felt awful. She enjoyed Armand's company. She was feeling somebody for the first time in her life. That evening, though, he announced he was going back to town. Even if he promised to keep in touch and call her every day, she felt lost and lonely. She wasn't ready for him to leave. "I will be back in the weekend, sweetheart. It won't be long." Aleera kept shaking uncontrollably. He hugged her. "What's wrong?" asked Armand gently. "You have no reason to come back here." He kissed her. It was the first time their lips met, and she felt her knees weak. "Now I will have this to come back to," said Armand, winking at her. The first day when Armand was away, he kept sending her text messages. Aleera was surprised. Nobody had ever given her so much attention. He was asking about her book, how she was, and telling her about his whereabouts. That night, though, after he wished her good night, she cracked. She felt miserable. She had let herself believe she could exist, but she did not. Proof was that she was there alone and her man was gone forever. She meant nothing. She was insignificant, and she couldn't possibly be loved. She was so stupid to have believed that someone like Armand could possibly want to waste his time with her. Her thoughts spiraled down out of control. She felt more and more miserable. Her head was pulsing and hurting. The panic attack was worse than usual. She kept seeing herself dead, and nobody would notice she had disappeared. Maybe in 50 years, someone from Armand's company would go check the house because nobody was paying the insurance, and her dead body would be found there on the bed. The food still on the stove and in the fridge. A voice at the back of her head started whispering that Armand was real, that he would notice if she didn't answer his messages. Armand cared. He would check on her before. Her phone lighted, showing a notification. A text message from Armand. "Sleep well, sweetheart. I wish I was there holding you right now. I hate knowing you have panic attacks while I can't take care of you." Armand cared. For some wicked reason that she couldn't understand, that perfect man that had just entered her life cared. It felt like one of those love stories in her books. She replied quickly, "I feel lonely. I'm crying." The phone rang. Aleera answered, shaking and crying. "You're not alone," said Armand's voice on the other side. "I can't be there right now, but you're in my thoughts and I care for you. You're not alone, sweetheart." Thank you," she stuttered. "Tomorrow is Friday. I will be back in the evening, okay?" "Yes," she whispered. She could be loved. Even if she couldn't find a reason why anyone would do such a crazy things, evidence was whispering in her ear. Armand cared about her. He talked her into her sleep, and she let him take care of her. She fell asleep with a new awareness, ready to wake up to a new Aleera the day after.